anyone in the United States today would cover up something like that.
Theodore McCarrick was created a cardinal in 2001 by John Paul II. Around that time, an American priest wrote to the Vatican to warn them of rumors that the cardinal was sexually abusing seminarians. But no action was taken for years, until, according to the Vatican under Benedict XVI, McCarrick was quietly advised not to travel or to be seen in public and live a discreet life of prayer and penance to avoid further rumors of his sexual misconduct with seminarians. A recommendation which the cardinal seemed to ignore as he continued traveling and appearing in public, even at the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis. But then, in June last year, accusations that McCarrick had abused a minor were found credible by an internal church investigation in New York. Although McCarrick maintained his innocence, he resigned as cardinal, something that has rarely happened in the history of the Catholic Church. Finally, he was brought to trial at the Vatican, though by now 88 years old and infirm, he did not attend in person. Delia Gallagher, CNN, Rome.
And we've got so much more straight ahead in the newsroom, and it all starts right now. Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for being with me this Saturday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. The mass shooting in Aurora, Illinois, that claimed 5 lives is drawing strong reaction from several Democratic presidential candidates. Senator Cory Booker tweeting this: "My heart is with the loved ones of the victims of the horrific shooting in Aurora, Illinois that has left 5 people dead and more injured. But we know our thoughts and prayers are not enough. Congress must take action to prevent gun violence," end quote. Other candidates also calling for the gun control debate to be front and center.
We know that America has been offered a false choice on gun safety laws. The false choice suggesting you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everybody's guns away. That's a false choice. It's not true. That's not what has to happen.
The reason that this country's talking about gun violence and stands a chance to do something about it is not because of people like me already in positions of power, not members of Congress, not the president. It's young people who have forced the conversation in marching for all of our lives or holding people like me accountable.
Right now, several Democratic presidential candidates are on the campaign trail as the 2020 race for the Democratic nomination heats up. And we've got a team of correspondents covering the candidates as they stump in states with early primaries and caucuses. And here they are. Let's go now to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where Suzanne Malveaux is covering Senator Amy Klobuchar as she campaigns in the Midwest. Suzanne, what does Klobuchar have planned today?
Well, actually, I mean, this is one of those stops, a very critical stop for her, because this is back in 2016 where Trump won by 1% the state of Wisconsin. And this is where Hillary Clinton did not campaign. So it's largely seen as a place that was neglected, that really needs some work ahead. Amy Klobuchar very much excited about being here earlier today at this coffee and bike shop. And she did, Fred, weigh in about gun control, comprehensive need for gun control. She told us this meeting that she had, and you might recall this was in front of the cameras with the president and a bipartisan group of lawmakers pushing for a bill on domestic abuse to really focus on that. And she said that she actually told the president what needed to be done. And here's how he responded.
It is time to do something about, by the way, after the tragedy and what we saw happen in Aurora, Illinois yesterday, it is time to put sensible gun legislation in place in this capital. I actually sat across from the president at that meeting, right? Because I have a bill, a bipartisan bill involving domestic violence. I sat across from him and I counted 9 times. He said he was for universal background checks.
And so ultimately what he ended up doing was approving for some limited background check enforcement as well as safe schools, but not really what she was hoping for, not what a lot of people in Congress and across the country are hoping for. But she is insistent that she is going to be pushing for that if, in fact, she gets that role as president. Now I'm going to go to Kyung-Ya Law, who is in South Carolina with Kamala Harris.
Well, Suzanne, here in West Columbia, South Carolina, the doors are about 30 minutes away for opening for the senator's town hall. Senator Harris you can see the line. This is one part of it. This stretches all the way through, and we can't really show you the length of it, but it's weaving through this parking lot here at this church. She had a tremendous crowd as well at her event last night in Charleston, South Carolina, where she talked about gun violence, the issue of gun violence, especially potent in Charleston because of what happened at the Emmanuel AME Church, where 9 people were killed during that Bible study by a gunman. She talked about how personal it was, and she paused to also speak with reporters about why she stopped at the church to lay flowers, that she wanted it to be a private event because what happened at that church, that it was striking the heart of the Black community. So she had those powerful comments as well during the town hall, saying that you can be pro-Second Amendment as well as for universal background checks. Now, to continue the talk of what the candidates are saying, to my colleague Layla Santiago, who is with Beto O'Rourke in Chicago. Layla?
Jung, I'm seeing lines here behind me. These folks are waiting to get in at a luncheon at the U.S. Hispanic Leadership Conference here in Chicago, where former Congressman Beto O'Rourke is scheduled to speak. Now, he has not said yet whether or not he will make a run officially for the White House. He says he is still thinking about that. He just said that last night when he was asked. But where we are right now is sort of key in the talk of gun control right now, given that we are in Chicago. Aurora is just about an hour west of where we are right now. Whether or not Beto O'Rourke will address gun control, we still don't know. But we know he has said in the past he is not here to take away guns from everyone, but he certainly brags about his F rating with the NRA. Frederica?
Layla Santiago, Kyung Law, Suzanne Malveaux. Thanks to all of you. Appreciate it. Meantime, we're getting new details on that deadly workplace shooting in Aurora, Illinois. Police say the gunman opened fire after being terminated from his job at the Henry Pratt manufacturing plant, killing 5 people. Among the victims, a student intern. At least 6 officers were injured. The gunman, 45-year-old Gary Martin, was killed in an exchange of gunfire with police. CNN's Scott McLean joins us now from Aurora. So, Scott, you were at that news conference. Are we getting a clearer picture of the sequence of events?
Yeah, we got a lot of new information in this press conference, Frederica. We learned that those officers who were shot after initially responding, we learned that they are between the ages of 24 and 53. They had between 4 and 30 years of experience each. At least 2 of them are still in the hospital. We also learned more, as you mentioned, about the victims who were shot. 2 of them work in HR. One was an intern, one was the HR manager. Gary Martin, he's the 45-year-old suspect in this case, and we know that he was fired that day. He was called into a meeting, and immediately after he learned the news, according to police, he started opening fire. The chief said that it is possible that he suspected that he was going to get fired. It's not clear whether this was his normal workday or whether he was called in especially. But she said that because he had several rounds of magazines or several magazines worth of ammunition with him. There were 3 other people who were also shot, Frederica. It's not clear exactly where, but we know that they're a mold operator, forklift operator, and the plant manager as well. Again, not clear if they were targeted or whether these were just random shootings. It was 1 hour and 35 minutes from the first shots being fired to when Gary Martin was finally taken down by police in a back machine room where police said he was hiding and essentially waiting for them to arrive. Here's more from the police chief.
The only thing I know is that he was called in. Once again, we can surmise that he was speculative about what was going to happen, as evidenced by him arming himself with a firearm. That's, again, I mean, we're speculating there, so I don't know exactly what was communicated to him. He did report for a meeting where he was terminated. Several were shot in the room with him, and there was another on a different level. The fact remains is that some disgruntled person walked in and had access to a firearm that he shouldn't have had access to.
So that gun, it was a Smith & Wesson handgun. It was purchased legally in 2014 after Gary Martin passed a background check despite having a criminal past. It was when he went to apply for a concealed carry permit. That is when he had to give his fingerprints. They were run through a federal database, and that is when a felony conviction from the 1990s in Mississippi came up and his right to own a gun was revoked. There should have been a letter sent to him asking him to voluntarily turn in his firearm. The problem, though, is that no level of law enforcement, it appears, actually followed up on that. And so between the local Aurora police or the Illinois State Police, somebody should have gone to get that gun, but nobody did. So the police chief today said that they are law enforcement is looking into what exactly went wrong. One other thing to mention quickly, Frederica, that the company here, Henry Pratt Company, they'll be holding a press conference here in just a couple of hours from now.
All right, keep us posted. Scott McLean, thank you so much. All right, still ahead.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
So if President Trump didn't need to declare a national emergency for his actually come back to haunt him.
Everything else, we have so much, as I said, I don't know what to do with it. We have so much money. But on the wall, they skimped. So I was successful in that sense, but I want to do it faster. I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
All right, faster. Is that the justification for a national emergency? We may soon find out. So far, at least 3 lawsuits have been filed, including one by El Paso County, Texas, and 2 others by government watchdog groups. The ACLU says it intends to sue as well. Joining me right now to talk about the legal ramifications and everything that we witnessed yesterday and what happens next, Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason, Princeton University historian and Professor Julian Zelizer, and CNN chief media correspondent Brian Stelter. Good to see all of you.
You too.
All right, so Jeff, you've experienced quite a few Rose Garden announcements before. This one is definitely in the unusual category because you talk about the president who makes an announcement, but then he also upstages everything by saying he's going around Congress.
Yeah, and it was a rambling announcement as well for something that was such a critical thing for him. And we've known for many weeks that this is something the president was considering. Of course, we went through that 5-week government shutdown, and then he came out, and it was just kind of a little bit here, a little bit there, but he got his point across, and it absolutely has created some waves, both in the Republican Party and, of course, in the Democratic Party. And I think to your initial question of what happens next, I think we'll continue to see some more lawsuits. And I think one of the bigger political questions is how do the Republicans, particularly in Congress, navigate this now, considering that it sets a precedent for potential future Democratic administrations.
So Brian, the president set the stage for so many fights, that Jeff underscores there, but then he also gets into a fight over facts, with the reporters and essentially undermining his own administration. Let's not forget this moment.
I get my numbers from a lot of sources, like Homeland Security, primarily. And the numbers that I have from Homeland Security are a disaster. And you know what else is a disaster? The numbers that come out of Homeland Security, Kirsten, for the cost that we spend and the money that we lose because of illegal immigration. Billions and billions of dollars a month. Billions and billions of dollars. And it's unnecessary.
So your own government stats are wrong, are you saying?
No, I use many stats.
Could you share those stats with us?
Let me tell you, you have stats that are far worse than the ones that I use. But I use many stats, but I also use Homeland Security. All right, next question.
And do you...
So Brian, the president just, further establishes he's kind of getting to be on this very lonely island, of alternative facts.
I like the way you put that. It is a lonely island because he's at odds with his own administration on some of these data points about immigration, about what's actually going on at the southern border, and about how drugs enter the United States. Look, I feel sorry, I feel bad for the workers, the federal workers who work really hard to get all this information, and then they hear their boss dismiss it and say that the information is wrong. It's a shame to see that, but it has been a theme in the last 2 years, so it is just a continuation of Trump's pattern. And I do think what we see in the polling is that most Americans do believe the government statistics. They do believe the facts that are presented here on CNN and elsewhere. They don't believe the president's version of what's going on. It's really only his loyal supporters that believe his really scary depiction of what happens at the border.
And Julian, if only we had the cutaways, of members of administration and White House sitting in those front rows listening to him, especially when he played out what he sees might happen, on the road ahead in the courts, like this moment.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake.
So, Julian, it was remarkable because he essentially, was upstaging even the Washington Post reporting today. In early 2018, he and White House lawyers were talking about the sequence of events. How do you go around Congress in order to get this wall money?
Yeah, he was giving us a little sneak preview of what comes next, the consummate television performer. That said, I think we're focusing on the substance of what he said, which is shallow and thin. But what might protect him is that the courts are often hesitant to check the president when presidents invoke emergency power or national security claims to take bold action. And he's also counting on the fact that despite some Republicans complaining, other Republicans, like Senator McConnell, have done a total about-face and are going to defend him on this. So even with the weak substance, even with a manufactured crisis, I think others in the administration are hoping that's what allows this to move forward.
And then, Jeff, it was just 2014, when Trump blasted President Obama on social media for his executive orders on immigration. And this is different because this is declaring national, emergency. But why does it seem as though the president is so removed from his criticisms, of the previous administration, only to be doing, and maybe even in an exaggerated way, the same things?
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of hypocrisy in politics, right? That is not a surprise. There's certainly a lot of hypocrisy there. And I think the question is whether or not that's something that the base or the Republican supporters of his will find objectionable, whether or not if they now don't find it objectionable, they will change their feelings about it if a Democrat were to succeed President Trump, be it in 2 years or be it in 6, and he or she does something similar on an issue that Democrats care about, be it gun control, climate change, or any other host of issues.
Republicans are still largely quiet. I mean, even after, yesterday's display. I mean, Julian, do you see that, that at least behind closed doors there are rumblings of what are we going to do with this if this carries on?
There might be. That's the story of the Trump presidency, behind doors rumbling by Republicans, but then in public on the floor of the House and Senate, absolutely no action. We see this again and again. There might be a few purple state senators who are willing to vote for a resolution against this use of emergency power. But if I was betting, I would bet most Republicans are going to support this. They wouldn't support a resolution. And partisanship.
And is it because it will take potentially years, caught up in the court system?
It is, and it's also the power of partisanship. They are focused on 2020. They don't want to undercut the president or the standing of the party. So a combination of those two things could very well lead to their silence, even though they are clear on the risks of allowing a president to use this power in this way.
And the president said, he admitted largely this is about 2020. Before we go, Vice President Mike Pence overseas in Munich, making some, rather interesting comparisons or parallels to President Trump and the late John McCain, or at least the leadership of these two men. Take a listen.
I think John McCain was a man who was strong-willed and hard-headed. He believed in freedom. He believed in fighting for it. He believed in speaking truth to friends and challenging friends to step up for our ideals. And I'm pleased to say that America has such leadership today.
So, Jeff, usually the late John McCain, usually headed the delegation to that, global security event, year to year. And so others were making mention of the late senator. But that particular moment of, comparing the leadership of this administration to that of John McCain, how is that sitting?
Well, I had the privilege of covering John McCain's campaign against Barack Obama. I also was able to cover his recent memorial service. And I can tell you pretty strongly, I think he would object to that comparison. Certainly, he would no doubt appreciate the praise that Vice President Pence showered on him about his own leadership role. But I think he would take issue, and I suspect some members of his family would take issue with the comparison between his style, his values, and the way that he acted out on them and the way that President Trump has. That's not to say there aren't many people around the country who are 100% behind President Trump, both on this issue that he did yesterday with the executive order, but probably not the people who are McCain supporters as well.
All right, Jeff Mason, Julian Zelizer, Brian Stelter, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, no stranger to sparring with the President of the United States, and now she is taking him on as the latest Democrat to enter the 2020 presidential race. Monday night, she joins New Hampshire voters to take their questions and discuss what's at stake for the country's future. Don Lemon moderates a CNN presidential town hall. That's Monday, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on CNN. Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will likely be taking a victory lap today when she gives her inaugural address in New York in just a few minutes. This after retail giant Amazon announced it was abandoning its plan to build a second headquarters in New York City. Ocasio-Cortez was one of the most vocal opponents of the proposal, bucking support from both the New York governor and the New York City mayor. CNN national correspondent Jason Carroll is in the Bronx. So, Jason, on the heels of this Amazon pullout and the Green New Deal that's being announced, that AOC, presented on Capitol Hill, she's riding a real wave.
Well, certainly not to her critics is she riding a wave, but certainly there are a number of folks here in this room that we've already been speaking to who feel as though she should be taking a victory lap. She is going to be giving her speech here very shortly, and we sort of talked to them and her people, her chief of staff, about what we're likely to hear when she takes the stage in just a few moments. She will be talking about the Green New Deal. She is going to be mentioning and talking about that's hugely popular with a number of folks that we spoke to here, Frederica. In terms of Amazon, she's likely to touch on that issue. As you know, she supported Amazon pulling out of the 14th district, her district here. Some folks here not particularly sure that was the right move. As you know, many people in New York City supported Amazon coming to New York City. So it's going to be interesting to see how she tackles that point of view. But what she's also going to be doing is tackling local issues. This is her opportunity to really speak to the people here about the issues that matter most to them. So she will be talking about that. She'll be talking about opening up her district office here. Something that sort of struck us, and that's what this is being called, the inaugural speech. That's what her people are calling it. That's what she's calling it. That's usually a term that's reserved for presidents when they give their inaugural speech. But her chief of staff simply said they're calling it that because this is her first opportunity to speak to people here in this type of venue. And in terms of speaking to some of the folks here, some of the local issues that mean most to them, we were speaking to some teenagers here. They say, there are deserts here, food deserts here in the community of the Bronx, which they call the forgotten borough, unable to get sort of fresh produce in parts of the city. They're hoping she addresses things like that, hoping she addresses local pollution problems. So a lot of things on the plate here as Ocasio-Cortez expected to take the stage just in about 15 minutes or so.
All right, Jason Carroll in the Bronx, thank you so much. And we'll be right back. Banned to New York City after strong backlash to the incentives the city and state gave the company. This week on Fareed Zakaria GPS, Microsoft founder Bill Gates weighs in on the controversy.
Do you feel like we're in a new mood? Do you either worry, or how do you feel when you see this kind of thing happening?
Well, it's not the 1930s where the system has really failed to provide adequate services, and therefore a lot of people are flirting with fairly dramatic changes, what used to be called socialism in the narrow sense. These are good debates. Should companies be able to compete states against each other? I get these subsidies. I sort of think not.
All right, you can see Fareed's full interview with Bill Gates tomorrow here on CNN at 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Another American retailer bites the dust. Payless, the discount shoe store, announced today it is closing all of its 2,100 stores and will stop selling online. CNN's Allison Kosik looks at why Payless is calling it quits and how it's part of a growing problem facing American retail.
Hi, Frederica. It's the end of an era. After more than 60 years of selling discount shoes, Payless Shoe Source is going out of business. The retailer, known for its buy one, get one free sales, had a strong following, but not enough to keep it afloat. So it's closing all of its stores in the U.S. and Puerto Rico, more than 2,000 of them. Payless is expected to file for bankruptcy later this month. This would be the second time in 2 years. After filing for bankruptcy in April of 2017, it operated under the control of its creditors and shed millions of dollars in debt, but it doesn't seem to have been enough to save the company. So all of its stores will be liquidated tomorrow on Sunday, with stores closing in March. The retailer is also shutting down its online business as well. Payless isn't the only retailer plagued by disruption in the retail industry. Whether it's Sears or Toys R Us, brick-and-mortar retailers are facing heavy competition from other retailers who can keep up with consumers' changing tastes and trends. Consumers are also shopping differently, using their smartphones to check prices and shopping more online instead of going to the mall. Because of those pressures, the pace of store closings last year hit almost 4,000, everyone from Gap to Sam's Club. Analysts say if retailers don't adapt and evolve fast enough, they could go out of business. And if last year is any indication, we could be in for even more consolidation this year. Frederick.
All right, Allison Kosik, thank you. With humanitarian aid has landed on Venezuela's border with Colombia. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has been blocking foreign aid following weeks of violent protests that have erupted around the country. CNN correspondent Nick Valencia has been on board that U.S. flight that just touched down. Nick joining us now. So how much aid are we talking about? How will it be distributed?
Hey, Frederica, we were on that C-17 as it's made its way here to Cúcuta, Colombia, which sits on the border of Venezuela. This aid is expected to be pre-positioned to help those that are fleeing the crisis, a crisis that's led up to 4 million people, nearly 4 million Venezuelans since 2014 to flee that country. And what is on the plane are basic goods, things that aren't available or accessible in Venezuela, things like nutritional biscuits, toothpaste, toothbrushes, just basic commodities that aren't available or readily available to Venezuelans right now because of the regime that they're currently living under. There is a lot of optimism right now and a lot of enthusiasm, and you could hear that in the press conference that's going on behind me. This mission is led by the U.S. State Department, Department of Defense, as well as USAID, and they call it a crucial mission, one that comes at a very urgent time while children are starving, adults are unable to provide for their families, streaming across the border into Colombia to try to get some sort of refuge here. The big question and the greater overarching question is just how this aid will actually get into Venezuela. It is worth noting, Frederica, that on February 8th, that was the first time the U.S. sent first stage, I should say, of humanitarian supplies that came into Colombia to help those suffering through the crisis. That aid still has not made its way into Venezuela. I was able to speak with Lester Toledo, who's part of interim President Juan Guaido's government. He's in charge of humanitarian outreach and dealing with governments as the interim president is appealing for more aid to be sent here by the international partners, international community. Lester Toledo reiterated his optimism, saying that on February 23rd, they plan on opening the border to Venezuela from Colombia as well as other parts in Brazil. And they say that that will be the testing point, that will be when, history is made. They're very optimistic that once they open the border, that the military will side with the interim president and allow this aid to be made way into Venezuela. Right now, it is an extremely desperate situation. That's why there's so many smiles here, Frederica. They are celebrating the fact that this aid has made it into Colombia and hoping it gets its way to Venezuela.
All right, Nick Valencia there in Colombia on the Venezuelan border. Thank you so much. All right, still ahead. prosecutors saying for the first time they have evidence of Roger Stone communicating with WikiLeaks. We'll talk about that next. Have evidence of Roger Stone communicating with WikiLeaks. A new court filing from the prosecutors say that the evidence relates to the release of Democratic emails hacked and released during the 2016 presidential campaign. For more on these developments, let's bring in Josh Campbell, who is a former FBI supervisory agent and a CNN law enforcement analyst. Josh, good to see you.
Hey,
so
Fred.
we've also learned that the judge in Stone's case has initiated a gag order. So can we expect Stone to adhere to that ruling?
Well, it's yet to be seen. So far, he's adhered to that ruling. This had to come as a complete shock, very depressing for Roger Stone, because we obviously know that he's this very colorful figure. He likes to use the media. He's been kind of on this campaign to portray himself as a victim of some of these, government abuse, essentially. But these are the same parameters that this judge had actually instituted on Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, essentially the same language. And at the end of the day, it's meant to protect the integrity of the trial, not to necessarily hurt Roger Stone, but again, to ensure that, the trial continues. Now, with information, and as you mentioned, we learned this from prosecutors that they have this evidence of Stone being in communication with WikiLeaks. They executed dozens of search warrants on various communications accounts, and in that they actually gleaned this information. Now, as you mentioned, this all stemmed from 2016, the theft of Democratic National Committee emails, and we've reported that Roger Stone was in contact with WikiLeaks, trying to attempt to figure out, okay, what did they have, and how could the release potentially help Donald Trump? What this latest filing doesn't actually say is that Roger Stone knew that he was talking to Russians. That part is yet to be seen, and Mueller has more work to do. We'll have to wait till his next filing.
Yeah. All right, Josh Campbell, thank you so much. All right, let's bring in Avery Freeman, a civil rights attorney and law professor, and Richard Herman, a criminal defense attorney. Good to see you both. All right,
good to see you, Frederica.
Yeah, so Richard, you first. How potentially pivotal is this development?
Well, it's the first time, Fred. The Mueller investigation does not have a press secretary, and it doesn't have, like this White House leaks like an old faucet. There are no leaks from the Mueller investigation.
It's just when they file stuff, you learn.
Yeah, the only way we learn is when they do court filings. And this week, yesterday, for the first time, we learned that there are allegations that Stone had direct communication with WikiLeaks. Now, he admitted previously to be in contact with Crucifer 2.0, and you remember last year Mueller indicted 11 members working for Crucifer, which was a Russian intelligence agency. But now, for the first time, we have for the fruits of the investigation and the search warrants obtained by Mueller, we see actually he's probably got emails and maybe text messages of direct communication by Stone to WikiLeaks in advance of email dumps before the election in 2016. That's what they were looking for. That's what's going to come out here. And I don't know if Stone, if he's a sly fox or he's nuts. And look, he's got President Nixon's head on his back, so that could be Exhibit A.
Or potentially naive,
he could be in trouble.
Roger, but Roger Stone had said, wait a minute, if I had anything, don't you think I would have destroyed any kind of evidence? But that they raided, his property. Is this one of the occasions in which they were able to seize information that helped substantiate these claims filed?
That's why they rated the way they rated it, Frederica. That what was so amazing about that, and I know there's been a lot of talk, well, there was too much law enforcement, it was overkill. No, it wasn't. This is a very dirty guy. He's proud to be a dirty guy. He calls himself a dirty trickster. Yeah, he loves that. So you needed that force. They got his computers, they've got his emails, and that's where this connection is coming from. There's a direct correlation between what we saw at that raid and what we saw in the filing yesterday. And believe me, this dirty trickster is more than, a guy that has Richard Nixon tattooed on his back. He wanted to be on the inside. He was trying to work with WikiLeaks, and he wanted to get that information to the Trump campaign, and that's where this thing is going. He's got big trouble.
Okay, and then now we've also learned that the president's press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was interviewed by the Mueller team last year, but along the way she's also helped to maintain a narrative coming out of the White House. How problematic potentially could that be, Richard?
Well, I think Mueller's looking at any patent lies that Trump is trying to have disseminated into the public to try to, again, build the case against him for conspiracy and obstruction. So if he was feeding her lies to get up there and say on a routine basis, I think that's where they're trying to go with that. 90% of what she says is not true anyway. So, you got to take it with a grain of salt.
But what really matters is what you say.
I can say it. I did say
that's
it.
That's the kind of made-up stuff that we see from the administration. 90%
in Ohio there, okay? That's what it is. It's the reality of it.
So, look, you know what's important, Frederica, in this is that they're going to match up what Sarah Sanders was told against evidence which establishes the opposite. She's not a suspect. Right. She's not on the line. She's merely a witness.
You don't know what
and that
she is.
matchup,
You don't know
that
what she
matchup is what's going to be important right here, and that could very well make a difference.
All right. We'll leave it there for now. Still also mysterious. All right.
You're
Richard.
right.
Richard
He
didn't, Fred, did he really declare an emergency and then say, I didn't have to do this? I really didn't have to do this.
I wanted to talk about that. All right.
Well, we all heard. We all heard what we heard.
For next time.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay.
All right, still ahead. It is starting to feel a lot like 2020. Democratic candidates on the trail right now making their cases to take on President Trump and gun violence. We're live coming up.